Nationally, electricity prices have climbed roughly 40% since February of 2020, and in some cities it's far worse. In Washington, D.C., electricity costs rose 93% between July of 2020 and July of 2025. Almost none of that came from you leaving the lights on. Utility companies asked state regulators for $31 billion in rate increases in 2025 alone, more than double the year before, plus another $9.4 billion in early 2026. Here's what almost nobody explains on the bill itself. Most of that money is paying for infrastructure your house will never touch. The short version, before we get into what actually changes your number, is this. A wave of massive data centers, built to run artificial intelligence, is straining the power grid so hard that utilities are spending billions on new power plants, transmission lines, and transformers just to keep up, and state regulators are letting them spread a lot of that cost across every residential customer on the grid, not just the data centers causing it. But knowing that doesn't fix your bill. What actually determines whether you're getting hit twice as hard as your neighbor 2 streets over on the same rate schedule is something sitting in your own basement or hallway closet, and it's the part of the story that never makes the news. Start with the mechanism, because it explains everything that follows. When a utility needs new generation or new transmission capacity to serve a giant new customer, a state commission decides who pays for building it. For years, that cost got spread across the entire ratepayer base by default, including households who never see a watt of benefit from the data center down the road. That default is now getting challenged state by state, but slowly, and most of the country is still paying under the old arrangement. Dozens of utilities received requests for more than 700 gigawatts of new power connections in 2025 alone, more electricity than the entire United States consumed in all of 2023. Even accounting for projects that never get built, that number still forces massive spending on infrastructure. And infrastructure spending gets recovered through your rate, the price per kilowatt hour printed at the top of your bill, not through a separate line item you could ever opt out of. By the end of 2025, the national average had climbed to about 19 cents per kilowatt hour, up from roughly 13 cents for most of the previous decade, and the wave of rate cases already filed hasn't fully hit consumer bills yet. So the base price everyone pays is going up, full stop, regardless of what's happening inside your walls. That part isn't in your control. No amount of unplugging your toaster changes it. What's in your control is how hard your specific house has to work to fight that higher price every single month. And that's where the age of your electrical system stops being a footnote and starts being the actual story. Here's the part that connects the two. As electricity got more expensive, a lot of homeowners looked at switching to more efficient electric equipment. A heat pump instead of an aging furnace, an EV instead of a gas car charged at home overnight, an induction range instead of a gas stove. All 3 of those are typically cheaper to run per unit of comfort than what they replace. That's not a marketing claim, it's the entire reason electrification got popular in the first place. But all 3 of them also draw serious power, and a house wired decades ago usually wasn't built with that kind of load in mind. A furnace blower motor sips power compared to a heat pump compressor running for hours on a cold night, cycling on and off across an entire winter instead of a few minutes at a time. A gas stove's electrical draw is nothing next to an induction cooktop pulling from a dedicated high amperage circuit. A panel rated at 60 or 100 amps, completely normal for a house built in the 60s or 70s, often can't handle a heat pump and an EV charger running at the same time without an upgrade. That upgrade typically runs somewhere between $1,500 and $6,000 depending on your area and how much rewiring comes with it, and that's before permit fees or a required meter-based replacement, which older homes need more often than newer ones. Faced with that number, a lot of homeowners just don't do it. They keep the old gas furnace running a little longer, or they keep charging an EV on a slow, inefficient trickle from a standard outlet instead of a proper level 2 charger, or they never make the switch at all, and they keep paying the new higher rate on the exact same inefficient setup they had 5 years ago, quietly telling themselves it's a project for next year, every year. The rate went up, the equipment didn't get any more efficient. That gap between a rising price and a stalled upgrade is where your bill doubles instead of just rising. It gets worse if your panel isn't just old, but actually dangerous. 2 brand names come up constantly in electrician forums for a reason. Federal Pacific Electric Stab Lock panels and Zinsco panels both have documented histories of breakers that fail to trip when they're supposed to, which is the opposite of what a breaker exists to do. A breaker that doesn't trip during an overload doesn't just risk a fire, it removes the one safety mechanism the entire system depends on, silently until the moment it matters most. Plenty of licensed electricians won't add a single new circuit to either of those panels, full stop, because doing so on a panel with a known failure history is a liability nobody wants to sign their name to, code technicality or not. If you've got one of those two brands and you've been quoted for a heat pump or an EV charger, the panel itself was probably the actual blocker, not the wiring in your walls, and replacing it solves two problems at once instead of one. Insurance investigators and electricians who deal with older housing stock both tell some version of the same story. A homeowner finally decides to electrify to fight the rising rate, gets a panel replaced because the old one turns out to be an FPE stab lock nobody had ever flagged, and only afterward learns from the installing electrician that a breaker in that old panel had been silently failing to trip on an overloaded circuit for who knows how long. No fire, no injury, nothing dramatic enough to make anyone call it a near miss at the time. Just a safety device that had quietly stopped doing its job, discovered only because a rate hike made someone finally open the panel door. Aluminum wiring complicates the same math from a different angle. Homes wired between the mid-1960s and early 1970s often used aluminum instead of copper, back when copper prices spiked and aluminum looked like the practical substitute. Aluminum expands and contracts more than copper does, with every heating and cooling cycle a circuit goes through. And that flexing works connections loose at outlets, switches, and the panel itself, in a way copper simply doesn't. An electrician evaluating your house for an electrification project isn't just checking whether the panel has room. They're checking whether the wiring behind that panel can safely carry a heavier, more consistent load than it was ever asked to carry when the house was built, day after day, for years, not just during an occasional space heater run in January. And if it can't, rewiring gets added to the estimate, which is the $8,000 to $20,000 range for a full house, not the panel-only number. That's the quote that makes people close the laptop and decide the old furnace can last one more winter. Knob and tube wiring, the ceramic knob open-air style found in houses built before the 1950s, makes the decision for you outright. It has no ground wire. It was rated for a fraction of the load a modern kitchen alone can pull, and it needs open air around it to avoid overheating, which is exactly why insulation contractors won't bury it and why most electricians won't add modern high-draw circuits anywhere near it. A house with active knob and tube isn't a candidate for a heat pump conversion until that wiring is dealt with first, no matter how much the higher rate makes electrifying look attractive on paper. Electricians who work on older housing stock will tell you the same story on repeat. A homeowner calls about a heat pump quote, the estimator finds active knob and tube in the attic during the walkthrough, and the conversation changes entirely, from a comfort upgrade to a safety evaluation, before a single word gets said about efficiency. So here's the honest math nobody puts on one page. The base electricity rate is rising for reasons that have nothing to do with your house and everything to do with data center demand and grid investment being spread across everyone's bill. A trend most forecasts expect to continue for at least the next couple of years, not reverse. Meanwhile, the equipment that would let you use less electricity per dollar of comfort, a heat pump, efficient EV charging, an induction range, often requires an electrical system your specific house doesn't have yet. And getting that system usually means confronting decades-old wiring decisions you didn't make and probably don't even know are there. The rate goes up on schedule, twice already in the last year for a lot of utilities. Your ability to respond to it depends entirely on what's already installed behind your walls. And that's the half of the story that never shows up in a news segment about data centers. None of this means you need a full panel replacement to see any benefit. Load management devices now exist that monitor your home's real-time power draw and automatically pause an EV charger or a heat pump for a few minutes when other appliances spike, which lets a lot of houses add one major new electric load without a full panel upgrade at all. Some of these systems cost a fraction of what a panel replacement runs, and they're becoming the default recommendation for exactly the situation this video is describing. A house that's fine for everyday living, but tight on headroom for one new big appliance. A subpanel in a garage can also add breaker space without touching your main service, which solves a full panel that's simply out of open slots, rather than genuinely underpowered for the loads you're trying to add. An energy audit, often free or heavily discounted through your utility, will tell you exactly where your specific house is bleeding money before you spend $1 on equipment. And if your panel turns out to be an FPE Stablock or a Zinsco, that conversation needs to happen before you add anything to it, rate hikes or not, because a breaker that won't trip is a fire risk with or without an AI data center 100 miles away. While you're having that conversation, it's worth testing the safety layer you already have. Every GFCI outlet in a kitchen or bathroom should trip when you press its test button. And if it doesn't, that's not a wiring cost question. That's a protection that's already failed silently, possibly for years, without anyone noticing because nothing ever went wrong enough to expose it. If your panel is old enough to be part of this whole story, it's also old enough that arc fault protection on the circuits feeding older parts of the house is worth asking an electrician about, the same visit you ask about panel capacity, because the connections most likely to loosen under decades of heating and cooling cycles are exactly the ones an AFCI breaker is built to catch before they become something worse than a bigger bill. A smoke detector on every level of the house, tested monthly, is the backstop underneath every piece of this. Aluminum wiring, an aging panel, knob and tube, a rushed electrification project done on the cheap. It doesn't care which of those caused the problem. It just needs to still be working the one night it matters. Was it worth ignoring the panel for another year because a heat pump quote came back higher than expected? Every homeowner who paid full price on the new higher rate for another winter of an inefficient furnace, on wiring they never got evaluated, would probably tell you the delay costs more than the upgrade would have. Get a load calculation and an energy audit before your next big appliance decision, not after the next rate increase lands on your statement. Check the panel brand tonight. 2 minutes with a flashlight tells you whether you're dealing with a footnote or a genuine hazard. Not a maybe, an answer. The price per kilowatt hour isn't coming back down. And what's behind your own wall is the only part of this story you actually get to rewrite.